Hi, it's Bonnie again. This is our last time together. Ready for summer. I got my hat on and I'm ready. It's been warm out. I hope you're getting outside and enjoying life, but I'm glad you're here for this last time together. Timeless themes. We've been studying all year stories from the Hebrew and Christian Bible. And the second part, we've been studying from the New Testament, which is the stories of Jesus and his teachings. And the last thing that we're doing today is talking about his teachings. I'll take my hat off now while we talk a little bit. You may have noticed, and I'm deciding not to use the flannel board today because all it is Jesus sitting around talking to people and what he taught them. So there would just be a bunch of people on the flannel board with Jesus sitting talking. So I decided I could do it all on the computer better. But you may have noticed a lot of people with head coverings on the flannel pieces. And that's because in those days, well, they didn't have probably fancy hats like that, but they wanted to keep that hot sun off their necks. So they wore a lot of those head coverings. Some of them still do in those countries today. But I looked up some of the clothing that the people wore in Jesus' time to see what they said about it, what the scholars, the people that study those things said. And it was quite interesting in that they said that the men and the women's clothing was basically the same. They had a tunic that could be short or it could be long, and they said children and servants and people that soldiers, people that needed to move a lot wore the shorter ones, and people that didn't have to move as much wore the longer ones. But then they had a belt that tied around that. It's often called a girdle. Then over that they wore a long robe, and over the robe they might also have another belt, and this one might have places to put things on it, like their money. Remember we talked about those Caesar money things, and they also had Jewish money things, and so they had little belt purses that they carried along. But you know, the Old Testament that we had a lot of stories from at the beginning was the Hebrews and the Hebrews' laws. This is important because when Jesus thought about it, and he knew all those laws, he was quite a scholar of all the Jewish laws, but he didn't agree with them all. And he had some new things that he taught that was Jesus was really a radical. And he taught new things that people had never thought about. We're going to talk about some of those today. The theme today is how we treat others. So, some people, this story, or these teachings, a lot of them came from a time in the Christian scriptures that were called the Sermon on the Mount. And the writers of this, and remember, this was written so long after Jesus died that we don't know how much is really true. It was kind of up to where the writer wanted it to be. And the writer thought that he wanted Jesus to be on a mountaintop, so it would be sort of like Moses getting the Ten Commandments. But other writers put him on the desert floor. So it doesn't really matter, but it's what matters is that people call it the Sermon on the Mount. So if you hear those terms, remember some of these things that we talked about today. So Jesus was sitting around talking to people and teaching like he did, and he said, you know, the Hebrew law, it is said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And in that Hebrew law, that meant that if somebody did something to you, you could do it back to them, but you had to do the exact same thing. If they poked you in the eye, you had to poke them in the eye. You couldn't slap them on the cheek. You couldn't do it. And he said, Jesus said, it has been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, if somebody slaps you on one cheek, turn the other cheek and let him slap that also. Now I can see you sitting there saying, wait, no way. I don't want somebody to hit me on both cheeks. But this is the principle of nonviolence. And I bet you've heard a lot about that in these last few weeks as protesters have come up. Nonviolence. Jesus taught this. Many people, Gandhi taught it. Martin Luther King taught it when he did his protest. Nonviolence. And what psychologists have said is if the violent people, if you don't counter them with more violence, it drains all the violence out of them. And Jesus knew that, and that's why he was trying to preach nonviolence. So that's one way he really disagreed with the Hebrew law. Now here's a second one. The Hebrew law said to love your neighbor, but hate your enemy. But Jesus said, love your enemies. Now that was really radical. Nobody had ever said that before. Love your enemies? They couldn't find anybody that had ever said that. They always hated their enemies. Remember the Samaritans that we talked about last week? And how that they hated them just because they built a different temple and they had different rituals? Well, Jesus said, love your enemies. So he different from the Hebrews. This was new. This was a whole new thing. Another thing that the Hebrews were always arguing about, or at that time they were called Jews, they were arguing about which is the greatest commandment of those 10 commandments that Moses said. Which is the greatest one? And they asked Jesus. They were trying to kind of trip him up and see what it was. And Jesus said, love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And remember last week when we talked about that Good Samaritan? And we said, who is my neighbor? And that's why he told the story. Who's your neighbor? The neighbor was anyone that needs help. Anyone. So your neighbor is everyone. So if you love your neighbor as yourself, of course that also assumes that you have to love yourself and treat yourself well. So think about that a little bit. But this last one is the one that is called the Golden Rule. Now, I don't know that Jesus invented this. I have seen where many different religions have this same guiding principle. And I've seen it in some of our UU things where they have put them all in the language of that religion, and it's all the same. Treat others as you would like to be treated. Another way of saying it is do unto others as you would have them do to you, as you want them to do to you. How do you want to be treated? Then you treat other people that way. And that's called the Golden Rule. Those are the 4 teachings that we're talking about today. Here's a little song that goes through this. Think of it if Jesus sang. We don't know it. The scriptures never mention him singing. I kind of think that came along a little later. He just talked and taught people. But if Jesus were singing, this is what he might have sung.
Hear you, O people.
to think and talk about what we just sang about and learned about. What do you think you ought to do when someone hurts you? Maybe pick one of these and talk to your parent or whoever's there. Jesus taught nonviolence. This is what I told you about, how nonviolence causes the violent energy to drain away from the one who is violent. Now, question, have you ever used nonviolence on someone who is violent? And how did it work? Did it drain the energy? I will say it doesn't always work, especially if the person has a problem, like a mental illness or emotional illness or something like that. But by and large, on people that think and have empathy, it would work. Do you think people usually notice oh, I missed one here. Oh, no, I guess I didn't. Let me go back. Here, I did this one. Judge not. It says, one of his teachings that I remember when I was growing up was judge not, and you will not be judged. And what does that mean? If you're always saying, well, he should be doing this and he should be doing that, and I don't like her dress, or I don't like his baseball cap, or whatever, you're judging people. And does it matter? Does it matter what dress somebody wears, or what baseball cap they wear, or what sandals they wear on their feet? What really matters? Now, I think that comes to a place where things do matter, and it's the behavior that matters. Although, what kinds of things do you judge? When somebody is hurt, to me, that's the point where I might step in and say, no, I can't tolerate this. You've gone too far now. I have to keep you from hurting somebody else. That kind of behavior, and that may be a judgment, but that's the place where I think that I have to change that. But when I grew up in a church, all the people that taught me that, I would think that some of them did not follow that rule, and they would judge people. Maybe they judge people by the color of their skin, not the content of their character. That's where I think you might. But then some people's ideas on the content of their character is not the same as others' ideas. So sometimes you have to differ on that. Sometimes you have to tell your friends, I don't think that way. I don't believe that way. Stand up for that. Okay. So now, the question was, and Jesus said, when he was telling those people, he said, do you see the speck in somebody else's eye and not see the log that's in your own? What does that mean? A little speck in someone's eye, tiny thing. He used that as a point to, you see that as a fault in somebody else, but you've got a whole log in your eye. You have a fault of your own that's much bigger than their little fault. And can you see your own faults? So, this was the question. Do you think people notice the faults of others more than their own? And why do you think that is? And is it a good idea to judge not? Well, we just talked about that. Number 4, Jesus taught that we should love our neighbors and our enemies. Remember that? Love your enemies. Whoa. What do you think of this idea? What would be a good example of loving your enemy? And how can you even do that? And the last one is, what do you think of the golden rule? Do unto others as you want them to do to you. Treat them the way you want to be treated. Would it be a good rule for people to follow? Would it be a good rule for leaders of our country to follow? That's an important thing to think about. Now, I want to close this. This is our last time with our Amen song. We're going to sing the whole time this time, whole thing, because it goes through everything that we've learned about Jesus. So let's do it. We'll start with the chorus. Amen, 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 amen. See the baby Jesus lying in the manger on a Christmas morning. Amen, amen. See them flee to Egypt, hiding from King Herod. See them back in Nazareth. Amen, amen. See him in the temple, talking to the elders. See him ask them questions. Amen, amen. See him when he's angry at the money changers. Cast them from the temple. Amen, amen. See him by the Jordan, wading in the water. John the Baptist, bless him. Amen, amen. See him in the desert, 40 days and nights there, tempted by the devil. Amen, amen. See him with his mother at the feast of Cana, making wine from water. Amen, amen. See him heal the sick girl, cure the old man's blindness, help the deaf and hear. Amen, amen. See him with the women, speaking with them kindly, teaching them and praying. Amen, amen. New verse. See him by the seaside, preaching to the people. Love your God and neighbor. Amen, amen. One last time. Amen, 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 amen. And this is the end. You have finished Timeless Themes. Take a minute and think and tell somebody, what was your favorite story this year? What was your favorite song? What was your favorite activity when we were together? I hope to see you when we can all be together again, which we don't know when that is. So, wear your mask and practice social distancing, and remember always to be kind. Bye. Happy summer.